Here I have my wife in the background working.
Oh, you're good.
Need to. Okay.
Oh, shoot. Oh man, now I got my boss getting online.
You're in trouble.
Okay, Jace, I don't know where Annette or Samantha are, but we do have a quorum and it is 6 o'clock.
Okay, well, I think we'll
Oh,
get
here comes
started.
Annette.
Hi,
Hello, hello.
how are we?
We're good.
Good.
Good, good. How are you doing?
I'm okay.
Okay, great. All right, looks like we're going to get started. And as the other commissioners come, then we'll welcome them. The time's now 6 o'clock and welcome to the May 26th, 2020 Planning Commission agenda or Planning Commission work session. And again, due to our technical limitations, we're going to bypass the pledge. So with that being said, we will move on to agenda item number 1, which would be a declaration of conflicts. Do any commissioners have a conflict they need to declare at this time?
None.
No. Okay, there being none, move to agenda item number 2, which is the approval of the May 12th, 2020 regular meeting minutes. Is there any changes or additions required?
Not that I saw.
Okay, it's not sounding like it, so we'll be looking for a motion to approve the May 12th, 2020 regular meeting minutes.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the meeting minutes are approved. So let's move to agenda item number 3, which would be a presentation on the general plan update.
Well, I'd like to kind of start it mostly to introduce the gentlemen that are going to do the presentation. As most of you know, it's been a while now that we received a grant to update the general plan and to have a land use or zoning ordinance update. So for the general plan, we had landmark design. We have Mark and Sam here with us today, and they'll kind of go through the presentation. So I'll turn the time over to both Mark and Sam.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. It's been a while. I'm not sure I've met everybody here, but you're right. We started this process a little bit over a year and a half ago, I believe. And we basically completed the plan late last autumn, and then it's been going through a review, and now it's up for adoption or to going through that process. So we're looking forward to prepared an executive summary. We'll be getting a copy to everybody. It's sort of it's a shorter version of the plan itself. It's focused on the key points that are contained in it. I assume that everybody's received a copy of the draft plan, and so we can go through that as well if needed. I was told by Steve I have all evening to present. Is that true, Steve? No, I think we'll take about 15 minutes to go through the executive summary, and maybe a little bit longer if you have questions, and then we can go straight into questions at that time. So we're just here to help you understand the plan and then facilitate the adoption process. You will eventually be having public hearings and making a recommendation to the city council, and then they will make the final adoption at the end with or without changes. So Okay, Sam, technical, what do? I request share screen?
Yeah, the share screen.
Yeah, Mark, I made you a co-host, so you should be able to have those rights.
Do you see my screen?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you just need to get rid of the
Well, I see.
Zoom.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Well, doesn't seem to want to let me go out. There we go. Okay. Had the plans open, but I'm gonna have to go open them again, it looks like. Okay. See that?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Awesome. And
Mark,
I'm going
this
to
might
invite.
be-
Oh,
this
go
is-
ahead.
I think this is a draft copy, Mark.
Oh, it is. Okay. I'll have to download it then. I'll just open it up from the mail then. That look right, Sam?
Yeah. That's the one.
Okay. Okay, so this should look familiar. This is the cover page of the general, or the updated general plan. And it's broken into, we've taken a slightly, intentionally from the beginning, we wanted to create a sort of a new look to the general plan and try to make it so it was both, a general plan supposed to inspire for the future and create a vision, but it's also meant to be easy for people to understand it. So we've taken sort of the real meat and potatoes and put it in an appendix, and that's a lot of detailed information about land use and about transportation, parks and recreation, economics, the moderate income housing chapter. And what we've done is the plan itself is sort of starting off by, giving some background information and then going through a process to for people to understand how we got from where we started the process and what we came up with through this vision. And so what's shown here is a summary here and the next page after of the public involvement process, because that really was a large part of what led to the plan production itself. And as is noted here, the residents that we met with, and we met with, we'll talk a little bit more about that with quite a few, was to eliminate, their top priorities were to eliminate negative perceptions of the community, to establish a robust downtown center, which is related to the work that our sub-consultants did for the form-based code that's been under production, and then reduce traffic problems and plant trees. We heard throughout again and again that this idea of creating a sort of a greener city as the community has matured was very important. We had an advisory committee that we met with. It was, some of you were on it, city council members were on it, Steve was on it. And what we heard at those meetings were, about improving it was really focused on the business climate in the downtown and also about the station area. That traffic was a major concern, getting in and out of the community, and then the traffic that passes through the community to get other places, and then to have more housing options, and particularly more higher density type housing through redevelopment in the downtown area and somewhat in the station area. We had throughout the process a project webpage that we posted what was happening, events, drafts of the plan, information. And we had after our first scoping meeting, as we called it, we just didn't get very good turnout. So we really focused on what we call focus group meetings. And it was to reach out to members of the public more directly. We had 2 discussions with high school students to hear about what their perception of the community was and what their plans for the future were. We held what we call living room discussions. We met with, Sam, how many people at each meeting did we meet with?
The first one was pretty small. Second one, we had probably 12.
12, yeah. So probably a total of about 20 to 25 people. The high school students, obviously, we had a lot more than that. And then we had a panel from the business community, and that one was really focused again on economic development. What we heard again is that these are sort of the summary statements that Roy is a good place to live, but the community is maligned by a negative perception, especially by outsiders, people that don't live there. People who live there really like it, and that they want the rest of the world to like it as much as they do. And that part of that is because it lacks some of the simple features that make good cities. And that's, again, the trees came up, the sidewalks that are connected. So it's kind of like public improvement, public infrastructure improvements to make it more walkable, a place for it's more attractive when you enter it. So that idea of gateways and those sorts of things were important. Housing was important, lack of diversity in housing. There was a sense that there's one part of the market was really heavily represented here. People came in sort of for starter homes. And once they could kind of build up some equity, they would go look for other houses in other communities, not because they didn't like Roy, but because there wasn't a whole lot of other options for them to move upward. So that was a big part of it, in addition to the higher density residential housing. Transportation, traffic, it was really a concern. Pass-through traffic in particular, as people are moving through the community to get to the freeway and to work, mainly back and forth from work. Roundabouts came up. It was a big controversial thing about roundabouts, which it's a detail of street design, so it might be something for the future to keep that in mind. Parks and Rec, we went into a lot of detail of Parks and Rec, but the things that we heard is they really liked the city parks, and they're felt like that maybe it could be improved as far as distribution, meaning that you didn't have to drive from one neighbor. Some neighborhoods were they felt were poorly represented with parks, and they'd have to drive or really go a longer distance to get access to them. They felt that some of them also had not enough amenities, but our assessment was that your parks the existing ones are actually have great bones and pretty good structure to them. The commerce side of it was the focus groups deviated from the perception of what we heard from the city leaders. The focus they thought was more on local commercial options, restaurants and dining, rather than large-scale economic development. And it doesn't mean that one is right or the other, or what we're looking for here is that vision again, and how to kind of get as many layers of public input as we move forward. And then support for smaller shops and local businesses. So take that for what it's worth. We did visual preference survey. That's basically where we show images and we kind of break them down into categories so we can kind of see what people like and don't like about for the future community. And that helps guide us as we make suggestions about changes or any improvements to the structure. And that's documented in the appendix. It's pretty interesting reading to see, what the people that we met with were saying. And then I didn't attend, but Steve and Sam and some of the council people, I imagine some of you were there at the Roy Dates Fair. That's where it was, had some good discussions with, you can see there are about 50 people. And some of them left comments, and it was, overall a fairly good event. Just other background information we're always interested in is how you're growing. As you know, on the Wasatch Front, it varies so much between the really rapidly growing greenfield communities and communities like Roy, which are starting to fill in, and most of the opportunities are more through redevelopment. And you can kind of see that on this chart here, that you're really in this plateau now. You grew from 2020 or 2000 to 2020 by, about 60%, but the expectations right now are that is going to stabilize. But the thing that could is the wild card there is if you do redevelopment, you attract some higher density housing, and as part of your reinvention of downtown, that could have a fairly significant impact on the total numbers of your community. So this page here is straight out of the plan. It's focusing on what the vision is that we heard, and it's right. I think the first sentence there is a good one, that it's a city that embraces its roots while supporting new ideas, major transformations that will make it a better and more livable place. And then we talk about what Roy is today, and then what future Roy will be. To build upon the history and the things that will make it a greener, more appealing community to current residents, and to attract new people into the community, and where you have a diversity of ages, which means a diversity of housing, and that you have things that will attract people to stay here, to spend their money in Roy, which is a wider diversity of economic and shopping opportunities. And this idea of neighborhoods, we heard that particularly from the focus groups, is that they felt that they had a really distinct neighborhood. They didn't know what the name of it was, but they knew their neighbors well. They knew the boundaries of their neighborhood, and they felt like other communities did. So when we heard that, we really started focusing on the history of your community, how your city grew from the earliest days to where it is now, where you have historic neighborhoods or history to the community that could be built upon, with this idea of maybe really enhancing the sense of neighborhood in the community. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. So from the vision, we then established guiding principles to move forward as we look at what the new plan would be. And as you can see here, it's just I'll just read the principles. You can kind of see, this is, again, as you look at the plan, these are images of what some of those principles might be. But the first one was to build upon well-established community history, patterns, and character. Second one is to leverage the positive characteristics of a built-out city. And what we mean is you're nearly built out, and everything's kind of going to be transformations through redevelopment at this stage. To create a legible and enticing downtown. To focus development and redevelopment near the city core and transit. We don't want major transformations or impacts on your established neighborhoods. Principle 5 is to protect and improve those neighborhoods, make them really blossom. Principle 6 is to encourage neighborhood identity and expression. So you can see, again, this idea of neighborhoods. 7, create a unified city of distinct neighborhoods, nodes, places, and destinations. Each neighborhood should have and each place in the community, people should recognize it, know the name of it, and say, we're going here tonight, or we're going to meet so-and-so, they live in X neighborhood. Link the city through efficient multimodal transportation. And you can see the wide range of thought about transportation here. It's not just bus and the front runner, it's sort of that missing in between pieces that connect all of that, the bike lanes and the scooters and all of that. It's really defines sort of where downtowns are today. It's all about getting that last quarter mile or half mile. Once you step off of the bus or out of your car, how do you get to where you're need to get without getting in your car and driving to another parking lot? So that then goes into our planning concept. We have broken it into basically, you can see it's sort of this, we've deconstructed your city. We start at the bottom with your historic development patterns and work all the way through your neighborhoods and districts. And so the first is that historic development patterns. This is an image out of the plan that the different colors show basically, you're a very relatively new community. I mean, even though you're nearly built out, you were established, the most of your growth really happened in the 70s and through sort of today. You had this slow growth period from the 40s to the 70s, and then you were basically an agrarian community or a farming community before that. So it's really those where your historic area is, what we had identified as where you've got that historic core of where the city established, and there's not a lot left of it, but it can still be something that you focus on and that you embrace and that you talk about it. It can serve as a way of again, creating that other layer of interest of Roy that's going to attract more people to the community. The future growth areas, we broke them into different sort of colors. The first is your station area. So that's the blue. Those were really established. You had I don't know if you probably know that, but you have a Focus Roy was a plan that was done to really take a look at the station area and the downtown area as far as reconstruction and reimagining them. We basically embraced that study in this plan and tried to incorporate it both in this plan and in the form-based code that was prepared concurrent with the study. We also took a look at your existing business centers in red, and then these sort of purple areas are these minor business centers that are located along Main Street and along some of the other streets that sort of link the other activity centers together. And then the roads, how they connect them. So it's this idea that you have a distinct places where where you go to do the various things that you want to do as you're living in the city. And these are images of what the different centers might look like. As you can see, the activity centers are more intense and more urban looking, where the major business centers are really talking about a sort of a cleanup of what you have now to take these shopping centers and really turn them into something that have become more of an attraction. And then your minor business centers are things that are these sort of smaller uses located along those major corridors. And that's a good segue into the major corridors. You can see how we've identified where sort of growth is going to be happening as an earmarked along your major roads. This is the places where you want to both get people through the community, but not do it in a way that your streets get sacrificed and your neighborhoods get sacrificed by moving traffic through the city. So it's thinking about how to treat the details of these roads. In some way, the pattern has already been set, and it's not like we're going to change things dramatically, but it's the details of how you actually treat these roadways and what you can make changes as they get widened and as they become bigger, that you do it in a sensitive way so that they actually give something back in the process. And we had our sub-consultant on this for transportation. It's a company called Township and Range, and they basically focused on these four things, which was the balanced multimodal transportation capacity, so that there's a balance between driving and transit and walking and biking, that you have better crossings of major roadways in particular, that's safer for pedestrians to get through the city as they're moving through it, and that the transportation is safe and comfortable, and that it complements the land use. And that's where we really worked closely with Township and Range. Tim Sullivan is his name, to really make sure that the land use and transportation were linked together and kind of one and the same. We then looked at your entrances into the city and within the city. We broke it down into what we call community nodes, which are centers that are important to the operations of your city as a whole. So the station itself and one of the more primary shopping center. We have these gateways, community gateways, entrances into the community. So when people arrive here, that they know that they're in a unique new city and they're not just an extension of your neighboring community. And then these community gateways where, I'm sorry, that's what the community gateway is. It's your community nodes is more of these local places that also define who you are as a community. It's kind of like creating almost a small little sub-district of your community that provides a special thing, or that people think of as they know it when you talk about the name of the place. So again, a lot of it's again about naming and making clear identities about places as the community continues to grow. And these are just examples of how you might achieve that. I know that we heard that roundabouts were not, they were contentious. Some people liked them, some people didn't. But the idea of using roundabouts or infrastructure improvements to really help enhance the idea of entrance into the community. They can incorporate a landmark sculpture or a light fixture or something that people know when they pass it where they're passing. Signage, unified signage in the community, screening and creating greenways through the community so that you're sort of almost hiding some of the in this case, it's a power plant behind that big wall, but that how do you deal with sort of screening things that aren't going to go away and that you aren't going to change over time? And then how you incorporate the buildings and make them into places that people want to, not just to go to, but to hang out a little bit and spend their time. For the green structure layer, this is really your parks, trails, and off-street trails and your crossings. And we broke it down into your existing parks, which are shown in the lighter green. And then the dark green is what we're saying is maybe that these could be looked at as future connections, so that the whole typical goal of a park system and trail system is that they're linked together and that you're not having to, again, jump in your car to go to a park, that they become part of the structure of your neighborhood or your community. And so we then broke them down into the distinction between a park and open space. Open space is more a natural type open space. You don't have a whole lot of that left, but what you do have is really important to try to maintain. And then your trails is really bringing the off-street trails so that they become your primary spine of your trail system, and link that with on-road bike lanes and biking throughout the city, so that you have this, the goal nowadays for most cities is that everybody should have a park within a quarter to a half mile from their home, so that they don't have to get in their car and go visit it. And that quarter and a half mile is linked by a safe, it's not just a sidewalk on a busy road. It might be a fully separated trail as shown at the top, or it might be just a very well buffered trail alongside a road that makes people feel safe. And then the neighborhoods, and I'm not going to say we apologize for these names. Sam, can you talk a little bit how you generated these?
So a number of these names were generated from historical context. As we dug into the history, we kind of identified where different phases of the town's formation took place. So Pioneer, for instance, represents the early history. The East Side neighborhoods, those are all have historic context. As we moved into the West Side neighborhoods, trying to give these names, some of them, like Eagle Lake, for instance, the golf course was the only real landmark out there to kind of base it off of. So others, it was a little easier based on, a dominant subdivision or something. But they all have some sort of root to something strong that ties their history or a current landmark there.
And for us, the idea here is not so much the names. They can change, or we can debate them and modify them, but it's this idea that each one of these is a distinct place. Because as we move forward in the plan, and as you probably read, what we're trying to do is not only unify the city through the neighborhoods, but to distinguish each of these neighborhoods so that the people who live there sort of generate their own sense of place. About they're proud about their neighborhood, that because they know it's so different than the other one. Doesn't mean that it's better. It just means that each one has some tweaks to it that create this sort of, again, a little village within the city, or a little district within the city. And, these are just some images of, one, like the Pioneer neighborhood, of sort of what's left of the historic stuff. And, we've broken them down into these categories. And we'll talk a little bit more what's shown in those 6 images at the bottom on the right, because a lot of this is just through what we thought were really simple, inexpensive programs that might be implemented over time to improve the neighborhoods, and also to galvanize the neighborhoods, to encourage neighbors to get to know each other through events and through other things. So it's really something that could be done relatively easily. They're not high cost things like some of the other, like buying some parkland and developing it would be relatively expensive. So this is a summary of what we think your city could look like in the future. We're looking closer to 20 years down the road. You can see kind of the station area downtown, your neighborhoods. It also breaks it into sort of the primary land uses. You are primarily, with the exception of downtown, the station, and your commercial nodes, you are a bedroom community for all intents and purposes. That's really comes out very clearly through the yellow. So we want to protect that sense of a great place to live. So that planning concept, just to summarize, it anticipates focused growth, development, transformation, as we mentioned, primarily downtown at the rail station. Encourages residential infill as part of completing the neighborhoods. Leverages streets and transit corridors to move people to and through the community. Provides clear and legible wayfinding to help people get to the places that they're looking for, to know where they are, and how to just make it more logical and clear to visitors and to people that live here, just where they are. That it should be green, and the idea of planting trees and making places and linking your parks and your trails all as part of a complete system. We were mentioning here that has a park or open space within 5 minutes. 5 minutes is generally, quarter mile is generally considered 5-minute walk. Half mile's 10 minutes. So kind of gives you a sense of the distances. And then it has great neighborhoods that people are proud to call home. And then the next chapter, so that's the second chapter of the plan. The next chapter is what we're talking about, implementation. We feel like so many of these general plans give a lot of ideas, and then they just stop. And we really thought that it was important to focus on the 5 key categories or chapters of the sub-chapters of the plan, and really focus on some of the details. So the first one is what we call urban or land use and design, or land use and urban design, transportation, economic development, housing, and then parks, recreation, and trails. And as I mentioned, each of those is presented as a factual analysis and a chapter in the appendix, but what we pushed up front here is sort of keeping it the visionary part of it. So when it comes to land use, we have these strategies of how to achieve the goals that are mentioned there, or the principles. And the first one is to build upon, is basically what we just listed there. To build upon your established patterns and embrace the history. Develop your growth areas, but don't forget the needs of the rest of the city. In other words, don't put all your eggs into one basket and just focus on downtown and stationary growth. And meanwhile, your neighborhoods need a little bit of loving care. Make sure that you're kind of spreading the resources more strategically around the community. To link your neighborhoods, districts, and destinations with a complete system of roads and trails. Enhance the sense of entry and exit. So again, that you distinguish your community rather than just making it like any other community. That you link your neighborhoods, districts, and destinations with this green system, parks and trails, and that you celebrate and distinguish your neighborhoods. I mean, this is a place where people say, well, Roy's, this place, my neighborhood, every year we have a street party. I don't know how often I hear people say that kind of thing. We're never leaving our neighborhood because we like our neighbors so much. We get together at least once a year and have a big party, and we do community service stuff together. And that's the cities that really seem to be, you know, in demand and where people are trying to figure out how to move into them. So that's something to really shoot for. This is taking that vision and creating it more of what, you know, in a more technical map. So it really shows all the land uses very clearly, as well as your lot lines. This is going to help Steve and you make decisions, because you're making recommendations as well as decisions about land use every time that you meet. And so it's clear that this represents where it should be heading. It's different than your zoning map. There will be inconsistencies, and that's by intention. You all know the future land use map sets the vision, and it's the zoning map should be kind of revised to kind of meet the vision that's contained here, not vice versa. Your transportation strategies is increase safety, increase street and pathway connectivity, provide a wide range of quality choices for different types of ways of movement through the community, increase and broaden connections and mobility. We heard a lot about people, they drive through the community. They located, a lot of the people we spoke to located in Roy because it was tactical for them. It was tactical, easy place to get to work. Support creation of great places, activity centers, and neighborhoods. Once they're here, keep them here through those things, and then conduct collaborative process to achieve your goals. Economic development, again, it focused we had another sub-consulting firm, Lewis, Young, Robertson, and Birmingham. They're economic and marketing specialists. And they did what's shown at the bottom, a SWOT analysis was one of the analyses that they did of sort of what your strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats are. That's SWOT, SWOT. And it kind of gives you an idea of what you want to be focusing on and what you want to be avoiding for the future. And that then emerged into 5 strategies. They felt it was really important to adopt your form-based codes to encourage the right kind of development in the right place. If there's issues with the codes, get them corrected and tweaked and get them in place, because we've all found communities that have adopted form-based codes really attract development, at least for the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, over the more typical Euclidean zoning, as we call it, like you have now. And it's just because it gives a lot more vision and clarity to developers, and it also tends to give them more of a focus on creating higher quality projects. And so that's a really important first step. The other is to enhance your street and trail connectivity. Again, you wouldn't think, well, what does that have to do with economic development? It's about that perception that you have this community that provides this place that people want to go out on the streets and go out and get through the community and not just drive everywhere. They saw that as a threat, that just if you continue to just focus on driving and getting through the community, that it's going to have a negative long-term impact on your economic development. Establish downtown Roy as a regional destination. That's sort of in the process now. And then include incentives and streamline your regulatory processes. So all of these are detailed in the plan, as well as to target or earmark community reinvestment areas. So RDAs and those sorts of things, EDAs. The housing, what we included in the upfront part of the plan was sort of, again, these strategies focused on it, but it's really important for you to know that one of the key things is every community has to have an up-to-date moderate income housing plan. That was very important. So they went step by step of what the state requires to meet that. So that has all been adequately addressed, and that's detailed in the appendix. So you're in good shape there. But what came out of this is that they really focused on the new code, the state code requires you to sort of find these focus areas that you want to establish, and not to try to just use one method to achieve your affordability, but to look at many different ones. So the first one was to apply for or partner with an entity that applies affordable housing programs. And as you can see, those letters that are after it, RSTU, those are the specific points that they're meeting by focusing on that. So that's kind of all intrinsically linked with what the state of Utah is looking for. The second one is utilize a moderate income housing set aside from a community reinvestment area. And the third one is allow for higher density and mixed use. And you're already doing that. So it's you're in good shape, and especially the fact that you're looking at actively redeveloping and going higher density. That's one very positive way to reach your affordability targets. Parks, recreation, open space, and trails. We did a very thorough analysis of, when we typically look at this, we look at a couple of key analyses. One being what we call a level of service analysis, and the other being a distribution analysis. Level of service basically breaks down your acres that you have today by your population. So it tells you how many acres per 1,000 people that you have. And that you have, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but they currently have 3.7, is that correct?
No, they currently have 2.
Okay.
Around 3.0.
So you have right now 3 acres per 1,000, which, is sort of what we find in more mature communities. Is the numbers start high in the beginning when population is low and people build their first big park. All of a sudden your numbers go up, and then over time the challenge is maintaining an adequate level of service. And so by us adding in those extra park sites that are going to increase access to parks, and that goal of a park within a 5-minute walk, that increases that number up to 3.7. So that's quite a challenge. And you'll see there's some costs attached with that as we're looking down the road in over 20 years, that's something that is going to have to be figured out, as how that gets paid for. And we have recommendations in here for that. But so that's one of the key things, is that your level of service is going to go up higher, which matches the vision, or what we're focusing on here. It's creating a greener city that's really going to be increase that attraction to encourage people to come here and stay here and develop new types of housing and development. This is a map that shows your existing and proposed parks. It shows what we did called a gap analysis. So each of those dotted lines or dashed lines are distribution circles around a park or a recreation facility that based on the size of the park, basically it tells you what your reach is of that park, and wherever there are areas that aren't covered, you end up with these sort of gap areas. Those are the areas that are shown in the, on this one here, Sam, it's in just the gray area, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you have a few gap areas. That's where we want to focus additional parks, if we're going to have them, so that people that live there have better access to parks.
I should have shown the gap map on this, but before we added the proposed parks to that distribution area, there's some pretty severe gaps in the south and west parts of town where people really don't have anything within a full mile of their house.
Right. And then we really took a close look at your trails, both existing. We have the existing rail trail, but this idea that you've got these very clear corridors for north-south as far as how to get people to move through the community. The challenges, it's just like the roadways, right? Your east-west connections are challenging, and you have quite a few blockages you know, the freeways or the rail lines themselves, major roadways make it hard for people to get across streets. And so enhancements north-south, but particularly east-west, is mainly going to be linked more at grade and at streets than north-south. We're really focusing on these major trail corridors. And then the development costs, we've sort of broken it down into parks and trails. Your parks is just to your existing parks today. We estimated what the cost is going to be to upgrade them to we've established minimum standards for your parks of what a park of certain category should contain. And then we analyzed whether it had that now, and if it didn't, we added it in. So your first thing is to make sure all your existing parks are up to standard. We added a special item here that we typically don't do, which is cost for trees, just 250 street trees or trees for your parks to green them up a little. And, you know, that might include some money for some adjustments to irrigation, that sort of thing. So that would, you know, go a long way to start meeting some of those goals or that vision that we heard from the community. Then to fill your existing gaps, we're looking at land for one additional community park, which is one of the larger type parks, and 3 smaller neighborhood parks, and 1 smaller pocket park. Altogether 28 acres, and we estimated the costs at $500,000. That's $250,000 per acre for acquisition and $250,000 for development per acre. So 14 million there. And then to meet your long-term needs during the next 10 years, assuming that, you know, there's going to be a little bit of growth, that you're going to need an additional 18 acres to maintain that level of service that we talked about, and to make sure that you have good distribution. So it's an additional 18 acres. So you can see another 4,500. So a total of just shy of 20 million. And then for trails, we just looked at, one of the key things is to make sure that your trails are all, there's no gaps in them. And so that we looked at your multi-use trails, the ones that are fully separated, and that anybody, kids and older people and everybody can feel comfortable on them. We looked at enhancing your crossings, lighting and safety improvements, new trailheads. We didn't include costs for bike lanes or anything like that on major roads, because we think that cost should be folded into the budgets for improving those roadways as they get widened. And that's recommended in the plan. So about another $5 million. So over the next 10 years, we're looking at about 25 million extra dollars for upgrading your park system. And then the sort of last subchapter or chapter is what we're calling the design and planning toolbox. We're focusing on 3 major parts to how to implement this plan. The first is revitalizing your neighborhoods through programs, physical enhancements to what we call the public realm. So things that are owned by the public, which is mainly your roads and road corridors. And then physical enhancements to help make your private development match what's happening within the public realm. And these images here, like the image of the street type, we developed, how many different types of street types, Sam? 5?
I think there's 6.
6 types, that as you're starting to implement some of these programs, that you know which type of street, what the sort of vision is for the street. Where you can see here, one of the key things is we're adding trees in this one. So we need a place to plant trees. A lot of your roads don't have park strips. We have some alternatives where you can't have park strips, of maybe for deeper lots that you could plant the public street trees on the private property. Some programs have been implemented like that in other communities. So there's a lot of positive ways that you can sort of achieve this. We're not saying it's one model or the other. It's just do what you need to do to kind of make some strides over time. And your neighborhood enhancements really focus on sort of these what is it, 6 key things. Neighborhood branding, so that's signage. Again, sort of a unified signage system for the city, but each neighborhood might have a different color or a different font type to it. Even the pole itself might look different. And so we think that that's something that could really add to the city over time of, again, enhancing the sense of neighborhood. Cleanups, again, it's not only a way of getting rid of trees, junk trees that have grown or weedy lots, but it's also a way for people to come together and work together and get to know each other and, enhance that sense of neighborhood. Urban forestry program is really about that idea that sometimes we find that in older communities that trees become a problem. People just can't afford to take them down. So setting up a program with a minimum budget to just go out and help and assist people with that, to almost a grant program. We've had a lot of success with a similar program in Ogden. And about 20 years ago, we did that, and it was hugely successful, as was the Porch Light program that we use in Ogden. That actually won a national award. Rather than areas that might feel a little bit dark or dangerous, that rather than investing the high cost of putting in street lights when you don't have them pre-wired, that you can offer free porch lights and a discount for a year for people to keep their porch lights on at night. And we did that for about 700 homes in Ogden, and it was on their one of the west neighborhoods on the west side of the tracks where they had a lot of issues, and it really made a huge difference to sort of how people felt about living in a safe neighborhood. Block parties, simple. You don't have to do anything. You just have to permit them. And it may be, it's a little bit of seed money for a couple of them to get off the ground. We've seen that have huge success in communities. So again, it's these programs. They're not high cost things. They're simple things to do over time. Where we're getting into the public and private realm, it's really more about physical changes. So changes to the road and access system, your open space system, as we've been talking about, just the visual character as you enter the city. And the private realm is, if we go to the next page here, is really making sure that those zoning codes and that they make a great place. They're not just about facilitating the easiest typical type of development, but they're creating a good neighborhood in the process. So it's sort of about thinking about what, not just about, I guess in a sense, it's in the long run, maybe getting further away from the land use control zones to more of the form-based codes. And you'll see that as you start implementing the form-based codes, they're two different animals as you work with them, but eventually I think the form-based codes start emerging of why they create better projects, because they're really thinking about the relationships between uses in the form rather than the land use. And the land use is still an important part of it, but it's not the overriding one. And so we're really focusing on zoning and code modifications for the private realm. And then the last chapter or section, we take a look at each of your individual neighborhoods, and you can see there's the 8 neighborhoods, and we create a special treatment for each of them. So again, we're not trying to just create one way of doing it. We're focusing on different things for different neighborhoods, so that's that idea of distinguishing them rather than making them all kind of appear the same, but they're all unified in a certain sense by the continuity of the tools that are being used. And so in this case, the Arsenal Villa, which is, help me, Sam, that's the lower southeast corner of your community. These are sort of the images show what the sort of programs are, and then they're described of what your program enhancements are, what your physical enhancements are. And we have for each one, a detailed map of where they're happening. And so you can see that we have, in this case here, neighborhood greenways that are along major, not really your primary streets, but your secondary streets that are important to gaining access into your neighborhoods. We have improved pedestrian access points. We have wayfinding enhancements at key intersections, so people know when they're looking for that neighborhood, that when they turn off, that this is the way to get there, to the left or to the right. That we have park improvements, and those are described in a little bit more detail as well. So it's really the plan concludes with very specific ideas about the future, and that it's something to pick away at rather than, that it just becomes sort of forgotten. We find a lot of these general plans just end up on the shelf. This is almost a call for action to keep reviewing it and remembering that this is what you should be looking at as you move forward in the future. I think that's it. I'm going to stop the share. Is that okay?
Steve needs to get a second to get unmuted here. Thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
So,
Well, what it really now comes down to is, does any of the commissioners have any questions for Mark or Sam? On what was presented or what they've read? And I do think they've done a lot of outreach at the beginning to get kind of an idea of what's going on or what people want. They kind of identified when they did that, how they did that. I do like some of the creativity that Mark and Sam have done by, even those not neighborhood, but those family room discussions. It's the first time I've heard those type of things, and I think that's great. You contact a family and have them invite friends and neighbors over, and you just sit in a quaint little spot. So I don't, commissioners, questions, comments?
I actually have a few questions. There's quite a lot, but I'll go through the key points, okay? So the front runner station, that's going to be mixed use. Is there going to be a grocery store or anything there? There's that senior high rise there? Or have we missed that window?
Well, again, that's up to market, as people sell land, buy land. If a grocery store is marketable for that, it's really hard to, this is a 30,000, 50,000 foot level idea of, okay, put mixed use in this area. Now, what exactly comes in there, zoning will take a bigger part of that. So, if we allow commercial grocery stores in that area, and if a grocery store wants to, then they can. I have a feeling it'll be more of a mom and pop shop than a grocery store, but
That's what I meant.
I don't want to say the market's not going to do it.
Okay. How many questions can I ask?
Well, this is your time, your guys' time.
Okay, so when it comes to transportation, gentlemen, who drives that conversation and who else pay for that? Is it UDOT? Or what's their role? Do they have one?
I wish we had Tim here, but I would say that UDOT has a major role when it comes to the state roads, which are your major roads going in and through the community, and your freeways. They fund it. They make those roadways need to make their parameters of traffic movement. That being said, that you can work with UDOT. Sometimes they're considered sort of the big, group there that are hard to work with, but our experience is if you get with them in the beginning of projects, and that's what's really presented in this plan, is to work with them to try to make sure that you get adequate funding for your bikeways and your green streams and all the buffers along the side of the road, so that you end up with what is being acknowledged in this plan. So it's your local roads that are going to be put in and funded locally. So that may be through UDOT grants partially, and these things take time, as we all know. Just to get on a UDOT project, it takes a decade or more once it's been established. So, yeah.
Speaking of decade, thank you. Speaking of decades and more with UDOT. So I noticed in there, and I don't, as obviously didn't give us the executive summary yet, but I'll go over it when you have it. When you're talking about the permit process being cumbersome, how do we make that easier and more streamlined for people so it isn't necessarily a pain in the butt for people that want to come and develop? And want
There's
to,
a lot of different ways to do it, you know, depending on, you know, Steve may be able to speak more to this, but I've seen a lot of success communities have with these one-stop shops. Where you can do all of your permitting in one at one desk. You don't have to go to get your sewer permit over here and this over here and that over there. They're all brought together. That has had great success in other cities. And I don't know how it operates now, if you're at that level or not, but it is really to just make it as simple and understandable and easy and, you know, timely. I think the key thing for developers is the time factor. When they keep like, oh, you did this, but now you need to go back and get approval from this entity and this one over here. And, you know, 3-4 months later, they've missed the envelope of getting their funding. And so it's really making sure that that's all unified. And Steve, you could probably answer to that better than anybody.
Well, I mean, I appreciate the question, Annette, and it's, again, this is kind of the general plan is just identifying things that we can work on. Getting the exact answer of how, the who, why, what, where, and how of how we can make the permitting process less cumbersome is something that we can do at a different time, a different place. But it's also residential permits for houses versus commercial permits for buildings. They are two different processes and take two different types of avenues to get done. Residentially, homes, Planning Commission doesn't see. The ordinance has allowed staff to approve single-family homes and duplexes to be built. So that process is a lot quicker because we don't have to go through, you know, the process of going to the Planning Commission. Or commercial buildings, multifamily of 3 units or more, go through you guys. So Planning Commission only meeting once a month, that's 4 week time to wait to where a single family, we're in and out within, you know, 4 or 5 days.
Gotcha.
So, you know, it would take the city to, if they really want to allow for things to go quicker, to allow for things to be at a staff level versus a Planning Commission or City Council level.
Okay, then I have 2 more. Tree USA, you're talking about planting trees, which obviously we need more of. Is that a really cumbersome process? How do we become a tree city? I guess I could ask that to Steve offline.
Well, planting trees, it comes to the fact of how do we, you know, in a residential subdivision right now, we don't require street trees. Do we change our subdivision ordinance to allow for less pavement and wider park strips, therefore you can get bigger trees where the developer will be the one planting them. But in areas that are already existing, most of east of the railroad, which exists and there's few sidewalks, getting trees there can be more difficult.
A major component of becoming a tree city that gets you the most points is to establish an urban forestry program. Where we actually have an urban forester, a team of people who are on a board, an urban forestry board, and they're making active plans and recommendations and identifying where in the city trees are needed. That's how a lot of cities get that status, is they establish an urban forestry either department, or it's paid employees, or it's more on a volunteer basis.
Yeah, could be a tree advisory board starting out with.
All right, then one last thing. When you're talking about revitalizing neighborhoods and doing community block parties and neighborhood cleanups and so forth, have you considered including in that list a night out against crime? I'm hoping you're familiar with that. Yeah.
Yep.
It seemed like it was missing, so I was just wondering.
Oh, great point. Didn't we have Septet or something like that in there, Sam?
We have neighborhood watch, but
I want to say I
Good
saw
point. I
Septet.
love that idea. We can easily add that in.
Okay.
I want to say I saw Septet in there, more of the downtown and commercial zones rather than residential.
I think that's an important one. So we'll make some modifications on that on the final copy.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for answering my questions. I greatly appreciate it. And thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
I kind of have one question, and I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of it on it. It's kind of back to the tree deal. I'm kind of going to assume that some of the things about the requirements for what size of trees and what locations is probably going to be set by an advisory board or whatnot. I just want to make sure that we don't run into an issue where, you know, the city allows or maybe somehow pays for a tree to be put in a park strip area, and then the sidewalk, you know, the roots damage the sidewalk after it gets to full size. And then we got to find out who's responsible for paying for that sidewalk because the tree roots.
Yeah, you know what I think it would be a logical step out of this is getting a very clear urban, like Sam was talking about, an urban forest zone ordinance, or even just a simple street tree or tree zone, tree ordinance. We just prepared one for North Salt Lake. And it basically took a quick look at the city of where the soil types were, they were challenging or not challenging. And then we created 3 different groups of trees, one for the urban downtown area where it's harder, more difficult growing situation, maybe in sidewalk and pavement, an area that was clay soil that was really hard because of the structure of the soil, and one that was more of your good agricultural soil. And then we just developed a proper tree list depending on the size of the trees, their goals about water conservancy, a whole range of things, and just codified it into a zone and into an ordinance. And that's very relatively simple thing to do. But the key there is to get a list of what you accept for trees, so that you don't accept those trees that are going to pop up the sidewalks, because not every tree does that, right? It's 3 or 4 that are the culprits. So you just don't want to use them, at least for street trees. They may have a whole lot of value in a park setting where they're out in the lawn or in and so that's something that, you know, we're pretty passionate about, because we're all landscape architects in our office. So we really want, when you plant a tree, you want it to not just survive, you want it to thrive. And so that care about the type of tree, the form of it, what it's doing, what its problems are, how you maintain it, that's a very important thing, especially when it's overhanging a street. You know, the trucks come by, they break all the branches off of it, that sort of thing. So how they're pruned is going to be really important. And you could do that through a fairly simple ordinance.
And then Jason, just to let you know, we currently have a street tree list. Trees that Public Works feel are adequate enough to be within the, you know, our park strips of size, to help, again, protect sidewalk and curb and gutter. They do have requirements on trimming above sidewalk, above street. So some of these things are already in play that you may or may not know are there.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm not fully versed in that. I hope that cottonwoods aren't on that list.
Nope.
No.
I particularly don't care for those.
No, none of that family will be listed on it.
And not on the public street trees. I can't limit your private trees.
But you know, in the spirit of sort of maybe some simpler measures, we do throw out some what might be considered crazier ideas. And one is this idea, okay, you're never going to get a park strip installed here because the street's not going to change for a long time. And so this idea of the city planting street trees in people's front yards and turning the responsibility over for the watering of it to the owners. I have that in my yard. It was deemed that my park strip was too narrow to support a large tree that I wanted. So where I live, the municipality allowed me to have the street tree planted up to 15 feet into my yard, and they put a lien on my property. Now, lien is that I have to care for that tree, and whoever buys it in the house in the future has to maintain and care for the tree. It's nothing about a economic lien. It's just that there's a piece of property there that belongs to the city that we're bound to. And I have to say, the tree that I got a big giant maple tree that I couldn't have supported before, and it is the showcase of the city, or my block now. You know, it was just a simple thing. It didn't cost me anything, didn't cost them anything, any more than bringing a tree and planting. They planted it for me. So that was just part of a creative thinking that places where you normally wouldn't be able to put in a decent street tree, you could still get that rhythm. You know how it is when you have a street trees in a row, even if it's 10 feet off where it might be in a park strip, it's still going to be very significant, particularly if you have a larger 40-foot tall trees lining your street. It could be, you know, just create that shady feeling. So anyway, those are the sorts of things that we're saying that in this plan, that, you know, you don't want to discount any sort of potential tool. You maybe want to do a little bit of testing over the years to see what works for you and what might not work for you.
Great. Thank you for answering that question. Do you have anybody else has any questions?
So I have a couple of questions. In relation to the parks, that was estimated to be about $25 million. First question is, what are some ways to fund that? Because I know we've had tax increases, and that's a pretty heavy burden to bear, and 25 million isn't chump change. What are some creative ways that you've seen to help pay for parks? I mean, obviously those are important. People like them and enjoy them, but that's a pretty steep price tag over the next few years on that. So I'd love to hear your comments there. And then I have another follow-up to that.
Yeah, I think the key tool would be, you know, if the political will is there, is to do a bond as part of, maybe tie it in with some other improvements. If you're going to go for a bond, you usually want to go for something big. And with all the stuff that's happening, maybe tie it with your changes that are happening downtown or at the station area as part of some of your urban, you know, so include a major parks renovation together with some facilities and some upgrades downtown. So that's one way to do it. The other way is to have that new development, pay it through some sort of impact fee, because they're bringing the new people in. They're the ones that are needing the parks. They should not get off, they should pay for it. They should pay for these improvements. And so figuring out what your impact fees, how they can be increased. One way to do that is to calculate your impact fees after you've upgraded your existing parks. That's what we're experimenting with that up in Heber now. They want to upgrade their existing parks and then evaluate their value of those parks so that they can increase the levy on the per lot cost or the per unit cost of new residential development. And that's very important, that you take a very logical, metered approach to anything dealing with impact fees, because it's can be very litigious if you go about it willy-nilly. You have to follow a code, you know, Utah being what it is, where it's really a favorable environment for developers. Developers will fight that tooth and nail if they feel like that you're asking for more than they rightfully should be paying. And so those are the two main tools that we've seen in the recent years. You could have a special, for a downtown area, or one of those nodes, you could have a SSA, or, you know, some sort of special improvement district. That's usually self-taxed by the property owners, that they agree to levy a cost against themselves to make some improvements. So I think it's not focusing on one or the other, but the one that you're going to get the big money would be the bonds, going to, for either a general obligation bond. That's, as you know, is a political decision, but you could go with some other, you have some other bonding potential that you don't necessarily have to ask the public through a vote. But probably not for that full 25 million, but for part of it. I've been working in South Ogden. They just did a bond for 12 million to put in 3 new parks, and they didn't go through a general obligation bond. They went through, I forget what they name it, but they leveraged off their bond rating in order to get the funding. And so there's a lot of tools out there, and we include in that chapter a list of all the potential tools that we think are available to you.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
within the,
Ryan,
Go
just
ahead.
to remember that this is, 20 years out.
Right.
That has to happen tomorrow or in 5 years. It's,
Exactly.
if we don't plan it, it'll never happen. I've got over, if any of you ever come to my office, over my window, I've got a picture of Central Park in New York. And on it says, we are a nation that makes realities out of hopes and dreams.
Mhm.
Central Park was just a hope. Someone put it in a plan and hoped for it. Now it is one of the most prized areas in, downtown New York. People are paying millions of dollars to be around it.
Not only that, it was a swamp.
Yep. So again, yes, it's a hefty price tag to build more parks, but I think if we don't put it in there and say, we need these things, we know for sure it will never happen. If we can get 5 more acres of parks in the next 5 years, fantastic. But if us and the council and the city citizens don't know we're trying to do that, it'll never happen. So,
Right.
I think it's
great
important
points.
to look at the, it's easy to get hung up on the big grand total figure that we put in that table. But when you break it down into the different line items, the first one on the list was improvements to existing parks. And, those are kind of small cost measures that, you don't necessarily need to bond for that. But say, one great opportunity that we outline in the plan in more detail are the various grants that are available for those sorts of things.
Yeah,
Whether
you
that's on
have
a federal level or even a local level, like Weber County's ramp. South Ogden's really, as Mark mentioned, their parks beyond the bonds, they also benefited from that ramp grant.
Yeah, we've helped them with 3 ramp applications, which they've won 3 in a row, the top ramps for the year. And that's how we helped fund those 3 new parks, was through major contribution. And that involved partnering. They partnered with Weber State, they partnered with the Water Conservancy District. They did a simple poll of the public that, validated that parks were important. And so it just made, and then they hired us to do a conceptual design of them. And, when it went to the ramp board, it was like, wow, these guys are serious. They have their, we had a contractor calculate the true costs of the implementation. So they knew exactly down to the penny almost of what it was going to cost to develop it. And that was, just a little bit in a simple investment on the city's side went a long, long way. They ended up getting, and as a result of that, they got from the state of Utah, a natural playgrounds grant as part of that. And so when you added all that in, it ended up being about 20 or 25% of the total cost of the park was basically free money. So you just have to be creative.
Yeah, no, and I was just curious on some funding, because I agree with Steve. You have to set the vision, and then you go for it from there. But I do think it's important that we consider a little bit of that funding. That's not our decision to make, but at least have some ideas out there. The follow-up to that is in relation to like the street design and things like that, with bike lanes and things like that. Right now, it's pretty dangerous to ride your bike anywhere in Roy. Anytime you go across any of the major roads.
We know we did it.
And you're still here. That's a good
Yeah,
thing.
barely.
But no, it's dangerous. I
It
mean, it's
is.
something that I won't let my kids do on certain roads and things like that. But we do have a good opportunity with 3,500 and 5,600 specifically, that are being under consideration. What would it take to get what we've got kind of in here? I mean, obviously we need to finalize this first, but what does it take to get that into UDOT's plans so that when they do those constructions, that's part of it, so that it's not something that we come in after the fact and try to rebuild. That would be cost prohibitive at that point.
The first step is to get this plan adopted. UDOT will never make any additions to their 10-year plans without it being adopted by the municipality or the community or the entity that's in charge of it. So by you having this ingrained in an adopted general plan that you see 5600 having a dual bike lanes on either side, that's the first step. And then to meet with UDOT and talk to them about it and get it going. And if it's a project that's coming up, make sure that that discussion comes up again and again, that money has to be included, extra money for those facilities. Now, those are those good discussions with UDOT, that you have them early and often, but you can't just say, well, we think that we want this, but this plan will gives you that, because it really highlights that's what's supposed to happen on those various streets. And we kind of overlooked that. We didn't go into a lot of detail on the transportation, but you'll see that it identifies every street where there's supposed to be major upgrades and changes, and of what type, and there's cross sections for them.
And then Ryan, just so you know, in our master land use or transportation map, sorry, we've identified those roads to needing multimodal transportation to include bikes and walking, but we also have adopted a complete streets policy. By those identified several roads that, as they get widened, we as a city and we as or them as UDOT need to take into consideration to have bikes and pedestrian along those. So we've kind of taken a few steps. This will help cement it all in together. So the transportation master plan and the complete streets policy aren't just by themselves. So.
Excellent.
And this kind of, I think, goes along with the earlier discussions. I can't remember how long ago that we went over this, Steve, that we talked about, when UDOT comes in to widen a road or do something like that, that we make sure that we had something kind of planned for the possible excess land that, from taking property type stuff, so that we don't end up with a situation like, I can't remember what street it was in Ogden that Steve, you had said, but
12th Street.
Which one?
12th Street.
12th Street. Yeah, where it's not unfinished and not, all the weeds growing.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, it was just a comment that I was going to make about that. So hopefully that kind of goes along with that same thing, and this will help it so that we have that plan in place and ready for when UDOT decides to go ahead and do our widening.
Yeah, it helps. Having a plan like this helps. We always say, be opportunistic. Don't just put your nose to the grindstone and say there's one path forward. And especially for things like open space or parks and that, when there's an opportunity to partner or something comes up, grab it and finish it, even if wasn't the logical next step. Because it's like you said, it's going to take 20 years to get there. And it may get a little bit out of order and a little messy in the beginning, but that's what we always recommend. That you just, those opportunities where you're going to get more bang for your buck, go for them. And so it's always out there looking for partners and grants and things that are out there. That's the only way to do it, because these are all high cost items. Have somebody else pay for it if you can. That's my
better
goal.
option.
Yeah, it's serious. If you could get somebody else to pay a good part of it, that's money well spent. We also said, when it comes to parks, I know it seems like a lot, if this plan is adopted, I think the key thing there is really to start thinking about buying those properties now rather than waiting down the road. They're going to disappear for one thing, and they may not even be available. So there's the reality check there, but it's never cheaper to buy land than it is today. Every day you can say that. And so we always, we years ago for Taylorsville, we did their first general plan when they were still part of the county, Salt Lake County. And the key recommendation there was that they buy all their parkland. So when they became a city, one of the first things they did is they did a bond. They barely had any tax or anything. And they bought up all that parkland, and it sat there, weed patches for 10 years. And they were like, I can't believe you told us to do that. And now they say it was the single best decision they ever made, because they had that under their control, and they slowly got the money to implement them and put in community centers and other things. And they never would have had any of that if they hadn't had taken the initiative and done it early. So it's, it's hard. Buying land is just never better than now.
That's a good comment. That's something I think most of the citizens have voiced their opinion on, that they would like to see more parks instead of more high density housing. So you're exactly right. There's no better time than now. So I like that part of the plan for sure. Because I would like the city to be able to have those options to be able to go out and get that land as soon as viable, so that we can provide more parks instead of high density housing. To a limit, we have to balance what we have, of course, but yes, that's a good comment. Thank you very much.
Use the high density housing to help pay for the parks. Hopefully will be the case. So.
Okay, do we have any other questions from any commissioners as well?
Let us know if you do have any questions. We'd be happy to weigh in. And Steve will let us know what our next step is. I know that we probably have to have we're scheduled to have at least one meeting with the city council, I would think. And then I don't know what's happening with the zoning ordinance, but
Well, that's another
animal
conversation. Kind of the plan is to at least have 1 or 2 town hall meetings, just to kind of introduce the general plan out to the public, kind of get some ideas if, people like it, or, kind of like Annette, she had a good question on neighborhood watch and stuff like that, things that we, even though we had quite a few meetings, didn't really think of at the time. And then bring it back to have the planning commission do a public hearing, and then have the city council follow with it. So
let us know with, where we are now with, the pandemic and all. If you're going to do that online, we do have the web page, so we could certainly easily leverage that to get, to get it out to the people. So
okay. Yeah, we'll talk about it, and I'll get with you, Mark.
Okay. All right.
Hey, Jason, it's up to you.
Okay, well, that was an excellent presentation, so I thank you for that. Being that the questions, we don't have any more questions for him. I think we can move on to administrative item number 4, which would be the commissioner's minute. Is there any commissioners?
We're going to depart. We'll see you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Sam.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, as I said before, we'll move to the commissioner's minute. So discussion within commissioners. Do you have any comments from commissioners at this time?
Wow.
So I'm not hearing any at the moment. We can, well, if you think of anything else, we can bring them up later, and we can send an email to Steve to talk about something in the next ones, if not. So being that nobody's asked any questions, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which would be staff update. Steve?
I received the presentation from Mark, tonight's presentation, so I'll send it out to all of you just so you have that. Again, kind of think of, if we hang up from this and all of a sudden you have a thought or a question, please don't hesitate to send it to me. I'll send it on to Mark and kind of get an answer or a direction, or which page that it, answered is on. Again, general plan, as Mark says, the unfortunate part is many cities, once they adopt them, they just put it on the shelf and forget. The sad part is the state knows this as well, and they are instigating that, if cities just do that, then, they're going to be held liable for things. So especially the affordable housing aspect, every year I have to do a report, and every 2 years I have a feeling we're gonna have to, send them something that we've done in the general plan to created, an option or things to be done within the city. So they're going to start holding more cities with their, foot to the fire, so to speak, to do things. I've been here for 5 years, and hence we're looking at a general plan update. I'm a little different. I look at that document all the time. I know the Parks Department, and part of the problem was, this is from October of 2019. I gave it to Parks and Public Works to get, to review, because they're going to play a large part of it. And the Parks Department just said, I love it. I want $30 million more of parks to come into the city. How he's going to pay for it, we don't know, but he likes the concept of thinking big and, getting somewhere in the middle that we can have. So Public Works is kind of the same way. Yeah, it's kind of terrifying to say street trees and stuff like that, but how many of you driven downtown Logan or Brigham City or Salt Lake and the avenues, and you've got those trees that are just lining the road, and you're just like, oh wow, I'd love to live here, or I like the ambiance that goes there. Those are the things. It's going to take time, it's going to take money, and it's going to take some initiative. Cities may, or not cities, businesses may come up and say, hey, I'll buy a tree and help plant it. Businesses may be able to come into play, and, we put a little marker next to the tree, and this is theirs, and, adopt a tree kind of program. So there's many things out there. And as Mark said, I don't want to get hung up on the details of something that, might be 20 years out. I just want to be able to have a plan that we have the dream that we want this and we want that, and how we get it. We'll just, every year or so, take a look and say, okay, where can we be and what can we do? Also, project wise, we are really close for 7-Eleven and AutoZone getting their building permits. I did get a application that you guys will hear in July. They didn't get it in time enough for June's meeting of in Horses, another assisted living facility here in town. It is something that we do need more of them as the community starts getting older and needing help to live. But we do have one of those projects coming, so I'm excited for it. It'll help bring in, it's all on weed ground right now, so it'll just beautify the area. Other than that, that's all I've got. Any questions?
Dave, you mentioned about town hall meetings. Are those things that they've already had or going to have still, or?
Well, that's something we need to decide when we'd like to have them. I'd love to have it more face-to-face.
Yeah.
So some of it is, again, just waiting to see what the governor does. I couldn't believe that how quickly we went from orange to yellow. I have a feeling they're going to take a little bit more time to go from yellow to green, to where we can have bigger meetings. But as Mark said, we could always put it on the website and allow people to, get it and make comments. Have a little survey or thing that they can do that on in the meantime, until we can have, a meeting where everybody can come face to face and talk, more than 50 people. But that's something that you as a group kind of need to decide when, where, what, why, and how.
I agree. I think it'd be good to be face to face rather than.
Yeah. I do like the thought, at least in the meantime, while this is still going on, of put it on the website and let people, make comments.
Yeah.
They may have some ideas and concerns or thoughts that we didn't think of. And, they did, to get a lot of these comments, they did have an online survey that people answered. And I think they got 140 some odd different people to comment on it, which is, to me, a great online survey. we at least start there.
Sounds good, Steve. I like that. Anymore, it seemed like some people seem to think that we didn't have, get it out, the word out enough. So anything we do that can have more input, be okay. Don't want to keep stall the process at all, but I agree with everything that's been said. We should be, you know, when we're finalizing this deal, I think it should be in person. So that other people that don't have the technical ability to be online could participate in the meetings or have a way to comment. So thank you, Steve.
Mhm.
Do we have anything else? Okay, doesn't sound like it. So that being said, we'll look for a motion to adjourn.
I motion that we adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a good night.
You too.